So I have had the Fuji XT3 for just a bit shy of 2 years now, and in that time this camera has been used pretty much non-stop for both professional and personal photography, as well as personal and professional video. When I got this camera, I actually shot a lot of test and review footage with it when it was nice and shiny and new, but I never got around to actually making a review. And the reason for this was cameras are complicated and reviewing them takes a lot of time. You really have to test the camera technically, and you have to get a lot of B-roll of the camera and with the camera. And at the time, I just didn't have the time for this.
Hey baby, throw your cares away. Good times roll. Leave your worry for another day. Good times roll. Leave yesterday behind. Let the good times roll.
The reason I decided to make this video now was because the micro HDMI port broke on this camera, as they're prone to do. So I'm going to replace the XT3 for video work. And in the relatively short 2 years that I have been using this camera, I got a lot of work done with it, and I've become really fond of the XT3. So I decided it would be worthwhile to do a review after having used the camera for nearly more than 2 years now. Plus, it would also mean that I'd get some use out of that old review footage.
Hush my troubled mind and rest. I need to breathe and clear my head. Shut my eyes and dream of things I could have done much differently. Wait for me now.
So why did I buy the Fuji XT3? Well, from 2015 until the summer of 2019, I had been using the original A7S for both photography and filmmaking, and whilst I loved that camera, and I still do, cameras had changed a lot between 2015 and 2019. Log profiles, which had been introduced in the A7S, had become widely available, and internal 4K was standard in most cameras. The autofocus of cameras had actually improved to the point where it was usable. Overall, by this point, the A7S had just started to feel very limiting. Since 2016, I had been using the Atomos Shogun to capture 4K footage with the A7S. And the image quality from the A7S with the Shogun is amazing, but there were just too many points of failure with external recording for me to really feel comfortable using it. When looking for a new camera, I had 3 requirements. The first of these was internal 4K, a high bitrate codec, preferably with 10-bit internal recording, and a decently fast rolling shutter speed. By this time, the vast majority of mirrorless cameras were able to shoot 4K internally, so this wasn't an issue. But most only went up to 100 megabits per second and were limited to 8-bit. So this in turn limited me to 3 main cameras. First of all, the XT3 of course, and secondly, the GH5. Finally, there was the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 4K. So I decided on the Fuji XT3 in the end. And the reason I did this was because I thought that jumping from full frame to micro four thirds would be too noisy and I would lose too much field of view. But in retrospect, I do think that the Pocket 4K might have been better suited to me because I ended up using the camera almost exclusively for music video work. That said, it's really much of a muchness because there was never a point where I regretted buying the XT3 over the Pocket 4K, and I still don't. So my first job with the XT3 was not long after buying it. And the idea behind this video was to make a documentary style montage video following a band across different venues. The video was very run and gun and really just consisted of me with the XT3 and the A7S on a tripod every so often in order to cover any performance footage. When shooting this video, I could really feel the quality of life improvements that 4 years of camera development had brought about. Internal 4K meant that I could shoot with a relatively small and inconspicuous mirrorless camera. Shooting straight to the SD card made me a lot less concerned about losing footage or breaking an HDMI cable. And when I did use the XT3 with the Shogun, I would record to both at the same time, which was nice in giving me the confidence that I was getting redundant footage. Being able to shoot 4K 60 meant I had the choice to go to half speed if I needed to, and smooth out any non-performance footage without forcing me to go all the way down to 1080p and compromise on the image quality. I even ended up using the face tracking autofocus extensively, which allowed me to keep both hands on the body of the camera and really helped me limit the amount of jitter that I was getting. I really liked the handheld footage that I got in the end. By the end of the shoot, I was really pleased with the X-T3 and definitely hyped to use it for future projects. So on paper, the X-T3 promised a lot in terms of technical image quality. 400 megabits per second, 10-bit internal recording, and H.265. In practice, I would say that subjectively the X-T3 delivered on this promise, and I think that the image from the X-T3 looks fantastic. The only areas where the X-T3 falls short compared to the A7S are in dynamic range and low light. The A7S, to my eye, has a lot more dynamic range than the X-T3. Apparently on paper the A7S has about 15 stops, whereas the X-T3 has 12-ish. Now, in my opinion, the X-T3 has more than enough dynamic range, and I never felt like I needed more. Likewise, ISO performance, while not the best, has been good enough for me, and I'm comfortable pushing the camera to 1600 and 2500 when I absolutely need to. I really do try not to go above 2500 though. But the more filmmaking and photography that I do, the less that I really care about image noise. I just accept that if I have to go to 3200 ISO, then I'll have to tolerate the noise that comes with the image. These days I try to look more at the image as a whole and less about the technical details. Even with the A7S, I found the low light sensitivity was more of a learning tool than anything else, because it allowed me to use relatively small and inexpensive lights to light large areas by just cranking up the ISO to 80,000 or something ridiculous. One technical aspect of a camera that I think is really important is rolling shutter. And for those who don't know what dictates whether a camera will have good or bad rolling shutter, this is dictated by the sensor readout speed. The faster the readout speed, the less rolling shutter artifacting a camera will have. Most of the time, rolling shutter isn't really discussed outside of a quick test, where a reviewer will whip pan the camera back and forth and then just subjectively decide whether the rolling shutter is good or bad based on their eye. And I do think there's a reason why reviews don't focus on it. It's very hard to quantify rolling shutter. In short, readout speed is the time it takes for the sensor to get from the top line of the sensor to the bottom line of the sensor. And if that's too slow, you're going to get rolling shutter. Just as an aside, this is not the same as shutter speed, which is the time it takes for each individual line to be read. Sensor readout speed is important because, in my opinion, rolling shutter influences the way that motion is rendered. And in my experience, with the A7S especially, this can ruin handheld footage. So a couple of years ago, I found a blog post that had actually measured the readout speed for a bunch of different cameras all the way back to the original 5D Mark II. But unfortunately, I can't seem to find it anymore. The X-T3 isn't particularly fast, but it also isn't terribly slow, with a sensor readout speed of, from memory, 1/50th of a second. This means that in a 25p at 1/50th of a second, you can actually get quite decent, quite nice handheld footage, with very little artifacting. I found myself using slow motion a lot more sparingly with this camera, and mostly keeping it in 4K 25p and developing a more documentary style of shooting, which I really like the look and feel of.
No, not yet. Wait, don't drink the water. Wait. I'm struggling to focus.
I will admit, before I got this camera, I was a little bit elitist about autofocus. Even when I bought this camera, I really did not see myself using it, but the Face Detect autofocus was absolutely a game changer. For both handheld and shoulder rig footage, it meant that I could keep both my hands on either the camera body itself or on the grips of the shoulder rig. And this allowed me to keep the footage a lot more stable, which also in turn made the rolling shutter less of a problem, and overall handheld footage looked better. Of course, it wasn't perfect, and sometimes it would hunt, But if you're using autofocus, you expect that and you prepare for that. You don't use it on critical footage where that would absolutely ruin the shot. Finally, I've used the X-T3 a lot for photography, especially since the HDMI port is broke. I've done everything from portraits to product shoots to street photography. The autofocus is fast and accurate, especially in photos. The physical dials means that changing settings quickly becomes a matter of muscle memory. For portraits, the skin tones are just naturally beautiful, and especially for portraits, I find myself doing minimal editing. The grip could be a little bit bigger, but I have got used to it by now. Overall, the X-T3 just feels really well thought out, and with so many quality of life features like an internal intervalometer, this little countdown timer for long exposures, the camera is very much no nonsense, and it doesn't feel like the camera was intentionally limited by Fuji, which especially at the time was quite rare to find. It always felt like some camera was being crippled by the manufacturer. If it weren't for the HDMI breaking, I definitely wouldn't have even considered bothering to replace the X-T3, and I really don't feel limited by this camera, and I still very much plan to use it for photography, as well as any travel filmmaking I do where I definitely don't need an external recorder. Anyway, it was definitely fun going over this footage that I've taken with this camera for the past few years, and I hope that this video was useful to someone, and if not, at the very least interesting or entertaining. I really hope that at least you liked the footage I've got with this camera, because I'm really proud, I think, of the work that I've managed to do with the X-T3, and I will see you later.